gorgeous, really. I mean, there are snow-covered mountains. I mean, it's like Switzerland, really very much like Switzerland, that area of Japan. The Japan Alps, they call it. And that's where Matsumoto was. And so I spent 2 weeks sitting in his studio, listening to what he did, which is the only training I had in the Suzuki approach. But it was straight from the master's mouth, so it was important. I was one of the early people to get involved. It's quite true. And that convinced me that this was the way to start children. What happens to a child when they learn to speak? Music is a language. You learn it best when you learn it young. That's why it's so successful. It's natural. Put it that way. It's learning the language of music the way you learn your native tongue. Every normal child learns their native language very young. And you can even teach a young child more than one language at the same time. Have one parent speaking French and another parent speaking English, which happens. The child's going to speak both languages. No problem. That is the time. And that's what Suzuki, that was his stroke of genius, to recognize that. You think of even different languages. A child brought up in a household with different languages, as I was, actually. When I go to France and speak French, people say, wow, you sound like Frenchman. I go to Germany, I speak German. They say, oh, your accent's great. I may not have that much vocabulary, but you get that young. And music is a language. Non-verbal language of emotion. And that the people who start young always have better equipment. It gets built into the body. That's what Suzuki focused on. He said, how do they learn their own language? And then I started experimenting with myself. I was one of the early people to do it. I wasn't the only one. There were other people there, with John Kendall and Bill Starr. We were a group, in a way, that got struck by this from different parts of the country. They were from Midwest, both Bill and John. And we all got the bug at the same time, and I got to know them too. You know, as the ones who got this started in this country. And so then we started a Suzuki Association. We didn't, I think at the time, or realize at the time, that it would finally actually take over completely for the way to do things here, but it has. Suzuki teaching is parent teaching. First, you had to teach the parent, because if you're going to teach very small children, they're not going to be able to practice at home by themselves. They're going to need somebody to work with them. You're teaching the parent to teach their child. They're at home with the child all week. You'd see a teacher maybe a couple of times a week at best. And Suzuki saw that. He was, frankly, the man was a genius. He saw that, and that's what he built it on. You know what small children are like. You cannot say to a child, go practice, and the child goes and practices if he's 3 years old. 3 is a good age to start music study, interestingly enough. I experimented when I first got involved in this concept with 2.5s. No, not ready. What's readiness? Readiness is, can you take a small instruction? And if a child, you may try them out and say, take this ball and take it across the room and then bring it back to me. If the child will do it on request, that means they'll take instruction. And so that was the criterion for the age you might safely begin them. And then the second thing, who's going to work with them at home? A parent. Sometimes it's a mother, sometimes it's a father, but a parent. Or occasionally a very much older brother or sister happens. You have to train them how to teach the child. So again, I say Suzuki training is parent training. And parent training is teacher training. They have to learn how to play, or they can't teach anyone else how to play. And I can tell you there's some very awkward parents. But they can do it. Well, they're not, you know, home to this kind of physical action or even to music making. And you have to teach the parent first. It's very interesting, when I first started doing this, I thought, okay, we'll give the parents 2 weeks prior study before we start the child. In very short time, I said, this 2 weeks doesn't seem to be enough. Now, School for Strings, they have to go 2 months for their own training. The parent, new training coming into the school must be by themselves, bringing the child, however, to observe other children for a 2-month period. The first test, we interview every new student, entering student, the parent alone and the parent with the child. And we watch the child very carefully when they come with the parent. If it's the kind of kid who just runs around, kicks and screams all the time, who we say they're not quite ready. Sometimes you get an impossible, that all they'll do is run around the room. That happens, especially with little boys. Girls mature earlier, you know. It's a known fact that a 3-year-old boy is much harder to work with than a 3-year-old girl. But you can sometimes do it. If you realize what their attention span is, it's very tiny at first. And that's one of the first things you try to develop is the attention span. That's why it's so good to teach children music. You're building focus. You have to like kids to do it, though. And there are a lot of people who don't like kids enough to do it. I mean, they may have their own children, but still. The School for Strings was officially started in 1971. But I never wanted to run a school. As a matter of fact, at Henry Street, when they were changing directors, they asked me if I would take over the job, and I absolutely refused. I didn't want to run a school. That was the last thing I thought I'd do. I had dreams about performance. Why people thought I could run a school, I didn't know. No, it's just happened. It just grew like Topsy. I keep saying it that way. I just was doing this teaching, and then I had more students than I could deal with, and I began to bring people in to teach them how to do it, and excuse me, I shouldn't swear on tape. The thing exploded, and just happened. We finally even had to get our own building and everything else, but it just happened. I said I didn't plan this. It was not planned. It just happened. As far as I was concerned, you see, it just evolved. It was an evolution rather than a beginning. Evolutions, of course, do begin at some point, but they evolve. And that's what happened out of the Suzuki ideas and the teaching I was doing and so forth. It just evolved. It got out of hand, put it that way. Then I had to get other people to come in and help me, you see, and that's the beginning of a school then, when you did the teacher training. And I always say I took the pick of